Hello everyone and welcome to our Witchwood review series. We're going to be going through each of the classes now that we have all the cards with some provisional theorycraft deck lists. These are kind of some of the first decks we've come up with now that we've seen all the cards, and we've got some ideas about maybe how things will shape out. We're going to be rating the cards on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is rubbish cards like Cataclysm or Sneaky Devil that are not really going to see play. 2 is kind of maybe your fringe or tech cards, but they're not going to see play except in exceptional circumstances. Cards like Dragon Slayer. Then we have your 3s, which are your kind of playable or niche archetype cards. So they might see play in some specific archetypes or have some specific niche play. Cards like Plated Beetle. That's kind of playable, and it sees some play in like Control Warlock, for example. And then 4, we have your staple or like deck defining cards. So here you have cards like Skull of Minari, which really helped Q Block be a thing, and cards like Wandering Monster, which has been great for pretty much all the hunter decks that we've seen up until now. And then at 5, you have like your meta defining cards. So cards like Call to Arms that really define how not only the class that they're in play, but how classes outside of that play as well. So, Call to Arms basically made it very difficult for other kind of mid-range decks to compete with Paladin. So yeah, that's going to be the rating system we're going to be using. So let's get right into it. And starting off with the Druid legendary Splintergraft. Splintergraft is an 8-mana 8/8 with Battle Cry. Choose a friendly minion, add a 10/10 copy to your hand that costs 10. So let's start off with your thoughts about this, Panamania.
So, I mean, from a value point of view, you are getting a card. So for me, the problem is the fact that you play it on 8 as an 8-mana 8/8, which is very meh stats for an 8-drop, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't affect the board, doesn't have taunt, doesn't have anything special.
Yeah.
And then, on turn 10, you're simply going to be playing a 10/10 copy of a minion. Not to mention that you've had to have had in play already.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are some synergy cases, but I feel like the synergy is going to be a bit too difficult to make it work.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a rating of 2.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I think the big thing, I mean, we saw on the final reveal stream, them synergizing it with Bewitched Guardian. And you really do need to get some really kind of board impact synergy on the 10 that you're making, but 10/10 stats for 10 isn't particularly good. We've got cards like Tarantus and Druid at the moment, which if you're just playing 10/10 of stats, you'd much rather play that. So, I mean, Splintercraft, I don't really see it seeing any play now, maybe in the future, but for now, I'm also going to agree with you on a rating of 2. Next up, we have the next Druid legendary, Duskfallen Aviana. Duskfallen Aviana is a 5-mana 3/7 with its text reading: on each player's turn, the first card played costs 0. So this won't affect the first card you play after Duskfallen Aviana. It needs to come back to your turn before you get the effect, whereas your opponent does get the effect immediately. And that's definitely a big downside to this card.
Yeah, and so for me, that actually makes it between a 1 and a 2. I would see maybe a 2. It might see some play at some point. Maybe there's some combo, but for me the problem is... Actually, wait, I'm going to give it a 1 because your opponent always gets the first use of it. So I don't think it's ever a chance for you to guarantee it survives.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there could be slim metas where it is playable, which is why I think I'm going to be giving it a 2. As I said, it's kind of like a fringe. In this case, it's a fringe tech card instead of just a fringe or a tech card. It's going to take exceptional kind of scenarios for this to really work in Druid, but obviously there are kind of scenarios where if you can get a really cheap spell like Ultimate Infestation or something like that off afterwards, that it can really work out well for you, especially against like, let's say, aggro decks, which might not make great use of the 0 mana cost, but a lot of the time when you play it against aggro deck, you're going to be behind on board, and it doesn't really do anything on the board at the time. So even then, it's kind of iffy. So I think I'm going to give Duskfallen Aviana a 2, but it's definitely leaning a little bit towards a 1. It's certainly not an impressive legendary here. And then next up, we have Gloomstag. Gloomstag is a 5-mana 2/6 epic beast with Taunt and Battlecry. If your deck has only odd cost cards, gain +2/+2. So this is kind of the odd mechanic for Druid, something they spoiled very early on, but not really something I think we've seen particularly great synergy with for Druid. So it kind of leaves me questioning why you would want to build an odd druid.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. For example, the big question though is in the odd druid is you're not running wild growth, or you're not running ultimate infestation. So those are like the two cards that kind of what you ask yourself why. If
Yeah.
odd druid does become an archetype, the card itself, if you get a 5-mana 4/8, it is pretty good stats wise. So I mean, if odd druid is a thing, I would rate it a 3, but because it is decent.
Yeah.
But outside of that, if the deck doesn't exist, it's just a 5-mana 2/6 taunt is bad.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's obviously one of the only payoffs for playing Odd Druid. I mean, the other payoff is Baku. And the problem with Baku is a lot of the time you just want to play Malfurion, and you can play Malfurion in the odd deck too. So I'm not even sure in the odd deck if you even play Baku in Druid. I'm not really sure the upgraded hero power is necessarily worth it. It does give you some better presence in the early game, but you want to play Malfurion as early as possible. Then you'd be overriding that anyway most of the time. So I think that's one of the issues with Odd Druid conceptually for me. But I agree, if this is, if Odd Druid is a thing, this will obviously be a staple in the deck. So, based on the rating system, I think we kind of have to give it a 3, but I think Odd Druid is not going to be kind of a playable deck for at least a couple of expansions until we see some more kind of odd cards that can actually work in the deck. They don't have to be specifically odd synergy cards. They just need to be able to do some of the kind of things that we see the even cards do at the moment. Like Wild Growth that you mentioned, like Swipe, like Wrath. We're really lacking any of those kind of cards in the odd slots. The only real ramp we have is like Nourish. And Nourish can't carry you both Ultimate Infestations, Card Draw, and Wild Growth's ramp. So, that's not really going to work there. So yeah, Gloomstag, a little bit iffy there. Next up we have Whispering Woods. Whispering Woods is a 4-mana epic spell that reads summon a 1/1 Wisp for each card in your hand. So this is going in the kind of hand druid archetype they've been going with a lot of the set. You'll see a lot of the cards coming up kind of operates within that game plan for druid. And obviously, if you play this for 4 mana, you want to be getting at least 4 or 5 wisps. And even then, that's probably not something you'd really want to do. So you're probably looking at needing 6 or 7 wisps to really warrant actually playing this card. And the problem is, if you're playing some kind of hand druid deck, is this really something you want to play on 4?
I don't think it's the worst thing on 4. I mean, it is something that fills the board. I mean, potentially, as long as you're getting 4 or more guys, obviously 4 is the bare minimum. 5 is okay. Obviously, you want 6 or 7 to be maximize it.
Yeah.
I mean, it is something that, it helps you fight for the board a bit. Druid always struggles a bit with that, especially if they get behind. I mean, it has some synergies. If you get buff synergies, that's always a bonus as well.
Yeah. For me, the big thing is that I feel like the hand druid deck doesn't really want Whispering Woods. It sort of clashes with cards like Twilight Drake that you might want to play on 4. Yeah. And it kind of doesn't really line up for me. So I don't even think it's going to be playable in the hand druid deck, which is why I'm going to give it a 2.
Yeah, I gave it a 3 because I think it is not... I don't think it's the worst card to try and keep you, fight for the board a bit and help you try to get back a bit, if you fall behind. It
definitely does a very different thing to something like Twilight Drake, which is something we see in the... And obviously isn't as weak to silence, but is more weak to kind of board clear. So it's kind of a trade-off you make there. Next up, we have Bewitched Guardian. Bewitched Guardian is another kind of hand-size matters card for Druid. And very reminiscent of Twilight Drake. It's a 5-mana 4/1 with Taunt and Battle Cry. Gain +1 health for each card in your hand. So that has pretty much the exact same text as Twilight Drake, except it's not a dragon, and it has Taunt tacked on for an extra mana.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Twilight Drake, this is obviously also very weak to, silence effects.
Yeah.
The fact that, it has Taunt means that I think it might have a little bit more board impact than Twilight Drake. So, in the hand druid deck, I think this will see play, and I think that's why I've given it a 3.
Yeah.
I don't think it's exceptional, but I think this could kind of be one of the cornerstone cards of the deck to make it solid.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the kind of major payoffs. The big problem I have is that costing an extra mana really hurts the card, in my opinion. I think having 4 attack on turn 5 is a lot weaker than Twilight Drake's impact on the board. Even though Twilight Drake doesn't have taunt, the chances are that when you're playing Twilight Drake on 4, you're not really dead. So Bewitched Guardian's taunt is pretty irrelevant when it comes down a little bit, a turn later. So I actually think Bewitched Guardian is just worse than Twilight Drake most of the time. So I'm going to actually just give it a 2 because I think, I don't know if you really want an extra costed Twilight Drake. Conceptually, I haven't tried building the deck myself. We will see a version of the deck that you built. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's more of a 2. I don't even think, like Whispering Woods, it necessarily is anything that makes me want to play that deck. And then next up, we have Forest Guide. Something I imagine they were trying to go more with the hand size matters as well. This is a 4 mana 1/6 rare minion that reads, at the end of your turn, both players draw a card. So symmetrical draw, it's kind of going away with Cold Light Oracle for what we see in the neutral effects. And Druid has traditionally had it with, I forgot the card's name. The 2/5? I think it was a 2/5 that drew symmetrically. It was a choose one. Either you both gain mana cross or you both draw. Anyway, point is, we have Forest Guide here. 4 mana 1/6. Those are pretty terrible stats. Drawing symmetrically, that's not particularly something you want to pay under like statted, minion for.
Especially this happens at the end of your turn.
Yeah.
So the fact is, you both draw a card at the end of your turn, but because it's the end of your turn, you can't use that card.
Yeah.
So at least with Cold Light Oracle, because of Druid immediately, you could at least use the cards. If you could at least use the cards.
Yeah.
Or you had the option. Whereas Forest Guard, your opponent gets the first use of this extra card anyway. So I think the card is absolutely trash.
Yep, I have to agree with you. I'm going to give it a 1.
It's a 1, yeah.
Yeah. Next up, we have Witching Hour. So this is a card that has some very specific synergies. It's a 3 mana spell that reads, summon a random friendly beast that died this game. So this is definitely something I think you want to put in a deck where there's only a slim number of beasts that have some very high impact when you resurrect them like this. These kind of resurrect effects can be quite powerful. The big question is often, how do you get those beasts to die in the first place? You could say something like Tarantus, right? That's a 12/12 beast that is protected from spells and targeted effects, well, non-minion based target effects anyway. But you'd have to actually have Tarantus die, and if Tarantus is dying, or if you're getting to play Tarantus most of the time, you probably don't need to Witching Hour it. So it needs to be something a little bit earlier. We've seen Witchwood Grizzly, which is one of the neutral cards that could kind of synergize with it, but having seen all the cards now, I'm not convinced there's any real Witching Hour deck right now.
Yeah, for me, I rated it 2 because of that reason. I mean, there is at some point, there is a kind of deck, but the problem is, cards like Barnes are cycling out. So, you like Barnes, Barnes with this card might have, had some synergy. But the fact that, there's no, Druid doesn't have an easy way of making, cheating out expensive minions and then letting them die. So, I don't know. Even though you're paying 3 to resurrect it, you probably still have to actually pay the normal cost for the minion and have it die.
Yeah. So you would need something like the most crazy synergy I can think from cards that are rotating out is like Bonds into Giant Anaconda. And then Giant Anaconda can pull the big thing from your hand, and then you can resurrect the Giant Anaconda when you have another big thing in your hand. But, that's not something that's going to be available in Standard. And I'm going to give Witching Hour a 3 because I think the card is pretty powerful and will be pretty key to the deck that it does find a home in, but that deck I don't think is going to exist now. Maybe not even in the next expansion, maybe only a couple expansions down the line. So that's very much a future rating of 3, not really something we're expecting to see much play now. And then next up we have Druid of the Scythe. Druid of the Scythe is a 3 mana 2/2 common minion with choose 1, transform into a 4/2 with Rush or a 2/4 with Taunt. So 3 mana 4/2 with Rush, that's kind of like a Shadow Bolt type effect. 3 mana deal 4 damage, just obviously can't go through Taunt. And a 3 mana 2/4 with Taunt is not too bad. It's kind of like a worse Tar Creeper in a way. A little bit worse stats, but it has more attack during your turn, so can
Yeah.
sometimes maybe make the trades a bit better.
So I mean, the fact that you play like the main reason, so the sort of the lower stats, the less versatility. I mean, so the fact that you can only deal 4 damage to a minion without taunt,
Yeah.
and the 2/4 taunt, it's due to its flexibility that you can choose. Obviously when you play it, you've got that choice.
Yeah.
That versatility in choosing. Do you want something that's a little bit more passive, or do something that's a little bit more proactive?
Yeah, the flexibility is a big bonus to any of these kind of choose one cards, and that's why you generally see them a little bit understated for if they were only ever one side of the choice. But we've seen choose one be all of the effects might have looked a little bit underwhelming, but the versatility is pretty useful. I mean, we've seen that with like branching paths most recently. Where I think in our reviews we didn't necessarily rate it that highly, but the
I did.
versatility. Okay.
I'm just gonna put it out there. I rated branching paths quite highly.
But I mean, if I remember correctly, you said for aggro druid, which definitely didn't happen. But anyway, the druid of the scythe is I think pretty good. I think it's by far the best druid card we're gonna see in this expansion. So I'm gonna be giving druid of the scythe a 4.
For me, it's also a 4. I think it can fit into most druid decks as well.
Yeah. It's kind of just like a removal spell for druid, and I think there's a particular druid deck that I have in mind that we'll speak about just now for druid of the scythe. Next up, we have Ferocious Howl. Ferocious Howl is a 3-mana spell. It's a common. It reads, draw a card, gain 1 armor for each card in your hand. So obviously, another card for the hand druid deck. Gaining armor, obviously, to try and account for the fact that you're not maybe playing as much on the board early on, and drawing a card, kind of comparable to something like Shield Block.
Yeah, and if I read the ordering correctly, you basically draw the card, and then it will count that additional card you've drawn, essentially.
Yeah, I think so.
So most of the times, I think if you play this on turn 3, it will probably gain you 5 or 6 or 7 armor, I think, because if you on turn 1 you have 4 cards without the coin.
Yeah.
Then turn 2 you'll have 5 cards. Let's assume you play a card, let's say Wild Growth. Then you're down to 4. Then you're up to 5. Yeah, you'll gain like 5 or 6 armor, unless you play one of the card, like what's it, the mixed card we were talking about that fills your hand with more cards.
Yeah. Look, Ferocious Howl kind of replaces itself, but I think it's really unimpactful. The only real synergy that exists is with the Spellstone for armor generation, so I don't really like Ferocious Howl very much. I think, like most of these kind of hand druid cards, I actually just don't see it's certainly not a card that's going to push me towards hand druid, and even in hand druid kind of deck, it's maybe not a card I'm all that excited to play. So for me, I'm going to give Ferocious Howl a 2.
For me, it's a 3 purely because it replaces itself, so I think it makes it a lot better. The fact that you gain some armor and it cycles, I think it makes it a little bit more playable. So that's why I'm giving it a 3.
Okay, and then our final druid card, one you just alluded to, Witchwood Apple. Witchwood Apple's a 2-mana common spell. Add 3 2/2 treants to your hand. So the only hand deck we've previously kind of seen before has been Handlock, which was a deck that could use the Warlock Hero power to gain more cards, to get synergies with cards like Mountain Giant. Druid doesn't really, obviously doesn't have that kind of ability available to hero power, so Witchwood Apple is the one kind of way to increase your hand size in the early turns. Obviously, it's very low tempo, but, is increasing your hand size going to be worth that low tempo play?
Well, I mean, that's if the deck thing, it comes down to the synergies with, as we talked about, Ferocious Howl, and also if Mountain Giant synergies. That's kind of the Mountain Giants as well as Twilight Drake and what's the Bush Guardian.
Yeah. So playing something like Witchwood Apple on 2, Ferocious Howl on 3, I think you can still play Mountain Giants on 4. Whether you went first or second, I think it works either way, right? Because it's the same as tapping on 2, tapping on 3.
Oh yeah, pretty much, yeah. If you don't have the coin.
Yeah.
If you have the coin, you can't.
If you have the coin, then
with being Warlock.
Sure. If you have the coin, then you can. You can chuck the coin. Worst case scenario.
Yeah, but it's the same as in Handlock, right?
Yeah. Okay, well, Witchwood Apple, I think it's one of the cards that kind of makes the deck work for me. And that's why I'm kind of going to rate it a 3. I think that it's one of the only ways for Druid to reliably get to actually playing a reduced Mountain Giant in Standard at the moment.
Yeah, I give it a 2 because as much as I want to believe, the fact that you're filling your hand with garbage, I mean, essentially these treants are 2 mana 2/2s with no effect.
Yeah.
So I'm not. We'll have to see if that sort of trade-off is worth, increasing your hand size, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not comparable to Life Tap, where, even though you're kind of paying health for that as well, you're actually getting cards from your deck. Those are cards that are definitely going to be better than 2 mana 2/2 treants. So I think that is conceptually one of the problems I have with Hand Druid.
Yeah.
But without any further ado, let's actually get on to talking about Hand Druid. So if we look at the decks we've got here, first up we've got your Hand Druid deck. So, I mean, do you want to take us a little bit through this deck? Some of the key cards. What's the game plan here?
So basically, what I did is I took essentially the shell of the current Jade Druid, minus all the Jade cards, and instead replaced them with sort of your hand Druid synergies.
Sure.
So, you'll see I've run in the Apples, the Howl, the Bewitched Guardian, the Whispering Woods, and obviously, to complement the hand strategy. The real draw points are obviously Mountain Giants and Twilight Drakes.
Yeah.
So that's basically, since the early days of Hearthstone, any hand deck, or mainly hand lock, those have been the major powerhouses.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the deck is pretty, sort of standard Druid cards, nothing exceptional there. The one maybe sort of unusual thing I know you commented on was including a card like Power of the Wild. So for me, it was kind of in some of the earlier Jade Druid builds where they ran Mark the Lotus. This kind of fulfills a similar role because worst case you can play it on turn 2 as a 2 mana 3/2, but it's got the synergies with Whispering Woods and with Spreading Plague.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's basically Hand Druid.
Sure, and I mean,
becomes a thing.
You also kind of have the synergy with Branching Paths if you do manage to get a wide board. Early on with the dream scenario where you can get Whispering Woods and Power of the Wild off, and then you can maybe Branching Paths to push. And obviously, Branching Paths is also a card that more than replaces itself if you just choose to draw twice. And otherwise, it's also a kind of a defensive mechanism, gaining armor. This is definitely a deck that can gain a lot of armor, which obviously synergizes well with the Spellstone.
Yeah.
And the one big issue is you can't play one of Druid's most powerful cards, which is Ultimate Infestation, because the nature of this deck is that you have a lot of cards in your hand, and when you have a lot of cards in your hand, you can't play Ultimate Infestation because your hand is too full.
Yeah, when I started building the deck, I was like, "Ooh, double Ultimate Devastation," and then as I was like, "Wait, we can't, in a deck we can't really play, Ultimate Devastation." So that is really quite a painful card not to have. But basically, the hope is that running Twilight Drakes and Mountain Giants kind of compensates for Ultimate Devastation, right?
Yeah. It's definitely a deck that can get off to some really fast wins against some slower decks. Mountain Giants on 4 is a very strong play for even Q-block decks right now. And this deck can even push harder after that, with like the Branching Paths. You can play like Mountain Giant on 4, Mountain Giant on 5, and then go like double Branching Paths, and then they're swinging for 10 each. Which is...
Or even things like Spreading Plague just to protect your Mountain Giants,
Yeah.
Yes. You've got that tool as well.
Yeah, it doesn't have as much removal as, like Warlock decks where you would have synergy with Mountain Giants and Twilight Drake, but it does have some different kind of tools like Spreading Plague and, even Malfurion, which, I mean, ultimately, honestly, I can't really see a deck like this being good, but we kind of, you were tasked with building this at least for the fact that it's a look into what the Hand Druid deck could be, and kind of a reason why I think the Hand Druid deck is just bad.
No.
Yeah.
But if it does become a thing,
here's a good place to start. I mean, if it's really your dream to play this, then this is maybe not a bad place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the Druid deck that kind of stuck out to me is the kind of Spiteful Druid. I mean, we see at the moment Mark of the Lotus is rotating and all the Jade cards are rotating, so that really affects 2 of the most popular Druid decks for a while now, which have been, Aggro Druid and Jade Druid. So for me, the one kind of remaining Druid deck that we see is Spiteful Druid, and Spiteful Summoner itself is kind of getting a bit stronger after the kind of rotation. A lot of the old gods, well, all the old gods are rotating, right? So what that does is it leaves you with the 10 mana pool being a lot more powerful, and because this deck runs Ultimate Infestation, it obviously has some really high blowouts with the Spiteful Summoner, always giving you the 10 cost spell. The 10 drops at the moment that are in the game, there's Mountain Giants and Emerus, the new Hunter Legendary, which is an 8/8. Those two are 8/8, and then you've got Deathwing, a 12/12, Tarantus, a 12/12 with the kind of Fairy Dragon effect, and then you have Ultrasaur, which is a 7/14. So those are the only 5 10 drops now. So that means you're going to be getting a lot more Tarantuses and a lot more Deathwings, even though you've got one less Deathwing to get. Just because of largely the factor of the old guards rotating out, right? So now you've got a 2 and 5 to get a 12/12, and a 2 and 5 to get an 8/8. And then a 1 in 5 to get a 7/14. And that's really the big thing that sticks out with Spiteful Summoner in both Priest and Druid, where you can play these 10 cost spells. So yeah, I mean, this Druid deck, honestly, it's not all that dissimilar to the current existing decks. Just looked at, once again, utilizing the Prince Keleseth with the Elemental package. Because the elementals give you some initiative. Because you don't have spells to kind of control the board and gain back initiative, you have to use minions. And that's also where some of the rush effects come in quite useful. We have Druid of the Scythe, which is another rush minion. Unfortunately, it doesn't really gain from the Keleseth buff because it transforms into the 4/2 or the 2/4 regardless of the Keleseth buff, unfortunately. Otherwise it's just the base body is the one that gains the stats. But it still operates as 3 mana deal 4 damage, which can be pretty powerful to help you fight for the board. And then there's also Muck Hunter. Muck Hunter is a 5 mana 5/8 with Rush that gives your opponent 2/2/1s. So, if you are able to get on the board early with cards like Tar Creeper and Serenade Chain Gang, you can make some good trades with Muck Hunter. And, Muck Hunter itself gives you some initiative. The one card that I tried to fit in was Scale Worm, another 4 mana rush card, but it needs the dragon synergy, which isn't quite there in this deck. So I mean, it's really just Druid of the Scythe and Muck Hunter ultimately that I actually managed to fit in out of the new cards. I mean, this could definitely be I think the more probable shell for Druid going forward, but honestly I have to say right now Druid is looking like one of the weaker classes post rotation, and it's already not in a great space. But I think it's going to be possibly one of the worst classes in that dumpster tier after the Year of the Raven kicks in.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is the fact that you see, I think you said, as a whole, Spiteful decks, I think across all classes probably goes up in power a bit.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe we have a Spiteful dominated meta.
Yeah, that could definitely be one of the better kind of mid-range deck options. And then the question is Druid really the one to be important in that? Spiteful Priest might still be better than the Spiteful Druid as well. So that's kind of something that could definitely be against the Druid. Overall, I mean, I've kind of shared my thoughts on where I think Druid's going to be. Do you have anything to add to where Druid is going to be as a whole after the Witchwood launches and the rotation for Year of the Raven happens?
A little bit I don't think it will be. I mean, actually, now it was suffering near the end of the meta as well. I don't think we can expect it to dominate. Druid, it might see sort of a niche appearance, like Spiteful Druid might still be a deck, but I don't see it being one of the meta shapers, if you will.
Yeah. And it kind of seems, in a way, a little bit of a consequence of them printing Ultimate Infestation, that they've gone so heavy on this hand Druid synergy, which really is a kind of deck that excludes Ultimate Infestation. As they've kind of had to be a little bit careful around just the power of Ultimate Infestation. So I think that could be a bit of an issue for the class going forward. And we'll have to see if Blizzard, is braver to add some better cards to Druid. But I can definitely imagine in an expansion or two, people are going to be calling for Druid to get some better cards. Yeah,
Yeah.
as I think it's going to be in a bit of a bad place. But that kind of ends off our Druid review. We'll be back with more of the classes. We're going to be going through all of the 9 classes with deck lists like we have here, as well as the neutrals. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, and you can also follow us on Twitter at PandemoniaZA and at Deb_gaming. You can also ask us any questions there. But yeah, for now, cheerio.